Let's be honest for a moment. What happens when you stand in the middle of a beautiful scene, perhaps the coast of Oregon on a crisp autumn morning, or maybe just across the table from someone you genuinely love, and the only feeling you register is flatness? It's a terrifying moment of clarity. It is not sadness. Sadness is an active emotional state, a surge of grief or pain. This feeling is the absence of all emotional surge. It is the muted, empty space where joy, anticipation, or even simple contentment should reside. If you have ever felt that way, you are experiencing the quiet, insidious collapse of your core reward system, a condition we call anhedonia. Anhedonia is the loss of the capacity for pleasure, but that clinical definition is too simple. The emotional reality is far deeper. It is the loss of the connection to the world around you. Your favorite music, which used to move something physical inside your chest, now feels distant, like noise filtered through water. Your favorite meal is just fuel. Time with loved ones is an obligation you meet, but without presence. The true core pain of anhedonia is not the absence of happiness. It is the erosion of meaning. It is the terrifying knowledge that the things that once defined you, your passions, your goals, your ability to feel alive, are now just closed doors. Many people mistakenly believe this feeling is a moral failing, a lack of grit or will. They think they simply need to try harder. But according to what much of modern cognitive psychology is showing us, this is a profound misunderstanding. The problem is not one of motivation in the conscious sense. The problem is one of system shutdown. Your nervous system, for reasons we will explore, has simply stopped responding to the world's signals. It has lost the ability to assign value to the things you do. This state of emotional hollowness is not a lack of interest. It is the chronic fatigue of the psychic infrastructure, a deep, pervasive numbness that feels more like existing in grayscale than truly living. The medical language describes this as a major symptom in depression, but increasingly we are seeing anhedonia as a transdiagnostic feature, a separate emotional injury that occurs across multiple mental health landscapes. It's the silent plea of a brain that has been overwhelmed, overstimulated, or disconnected for too long. For those of us who carry this quiet intensity, the biggest fear is that this flatness is permanent. That the brain, the machine of your inner world, has simply stopped producing the necessary current. That's the question we need to answer. Why does the brain stop experiencing pleasure? And how do we even begin to rewire something so fundamental? To truly understand this shutdown, we need a visual anchor, a metaphor that grounds this clinical language in lived experience. Let's imagine the brain's motivation system not as a sophisticated control center, but as an old, familiar, deserted gas station on a forgotten stretch of highway. This station, let's call it the reward center, is where you are supposed to pull over to refuel your inner journey. The fuel you seek is dopamine, and the act of fueling represents anticipation and effort. Every single morning, every single choice you make, from making coffee to tackling a major work project, requires a transaction at this station. You are promised a reward later, and that promise gives you the drive to push the pump handle. In a healthy state, you drive up, the pump works instantly, and you leave feeling the surge of anticipation, the promise that the destination will be worth the effort. That is the system functioning normally. But when anhedonia sets in, you pull up to the station and the pumps are dead. You swipe your card, you try to lift the nozzle, but the screen stubbornly displays, out of service. You still need to travel. You still have obligations. But there is no fuel, no dopamine-fueled promise to push you forward. This is the central metaphor for anticipatory anhedonia, the type that deals with drive and kinesis, the urge to move. You know logically that finishing the project or exercising should be rewarding, but that knowledge is intellectual, sterile. You feel no gravitational pull toward the reward. The destination, once vivid and brightly lit, now feels as cold and distant as the moon. You are forced to travel on residual fumes, on sheer willpower, which is a limited resource that quickly burns out. You become what we call high-functioning numb. You meet external expectations because you must, but every single action is an internal act of dragging yourself forward, devoid of the internal, self-sustaining loop of motivation. You are making the transactions, but the reward ledger remains at zero. This constant draining, this lack of internal return on investment, is what leads to the pervasive sense of emptiness and emotional exhaustion that defines anhedonia. It is a quiet collapse, unnoticed by the world, but acutely felt by the traveler. Now, let's move beyond metaphor and look at the actual wiring of that gas station. According to a wealth of research in neuroscience, the brain's reward system is not a single location, but an intricate circuit involving three primary components that must synchronize perfectly. When anhedonia strikes, this circuit breaks down. The first component is the prefrontal cortex, PFC. This is the planning center. It's responsible for calculating the value of a potential reward. It answers the question, is the effort required worth the outcome? In anhedonia, the PFC often fails to assign sufficient value to future rewards, effectively saying, this isn't worth getting out of bed for. The second key area is the ventral striatum, which includes the famous nucleus accumbens. This is often incorrectly termed the pleasure center. Clinically, the nucleus accumbens is crucial for generating the immediate, physical feeling of pleasure, the consummatory pleasure. It's the region that says, this food tastes good right now. When this part is dysregulated, you experience the inability to enjoy things in the moment. You eat your favorite meal, and it tastes like cardboard. You are present, but the physical sensation of joy is missing. And the third, perhaps most critical component, is the dopaminergic system. Dopamine is the neurotransmitter most frequently cited in reward pathways, but we must understand its true role to grasp anhedonia. Dopamine is not the pleasure molecule. It is the anticipation and motivation molecule. It is the driving force, the chemical message that says, go there, do that. It will be good. Studies show that a collapse in this dopaminergic signaling is what drives anticipatory anhedonia, the loss of the urge to pursue rewarding experiences. When these systems stop communicating properly, activities that should feel inherently reinforcing, activities that build habits and identity, do not register. The breakdown reveals that anhedonia is far more complex than simply losing pleasure. It is a disruption in the entire scaffolding of motivation, learning, and reinforcement. It is a quiet, neurochemical reality that fundamentally alters how you perceive the effort to reward ratio of existence itself. You are not choosing to feel this way. Your internal machinery has been temporarily rewired. The clinical analysis of anhedonia reveals a crucial, often overlooked split. It's not one single psychological state, but two distinct experiences of emptiness, and understanding this separation is vital for self-compassion. The first, as we have explored, is anticipatory anhedonia, the collapse of the future. Psychologically, this deals with the systems of drive, hope, and determination. If you struggle with this type, you may still theoretically enjoy a glass of wine or a good movie when it happens, but you lack the will or desire to arrange the plans, to commit to the movie, or even to buy the wine. You have lost the fuel for tomorrow. This form is often linked to the relentless stress and high-functioning burnout we see in modern American culture, where sustained effort is demanded without corresponding immediate psychic payoff. Eventually, the system quits investing. The second is consummatory anhedonia, the collapse of the present. This is the inability to feel pleasure in the moment. The clinical models call this the disruption of the immediate hedonic experience. It's the sensation that life is happening to you, rather than through you. You are physically present, your body is consuming the reward, the warm bath, the beautiful sunset, but the internal register for joy is completely muted. It is a profound psychic disconnect. According to psychological frameworks, these distinctions reveal that anhedonia is not just about diminished feelings. It's about the diminished systems of urge, drive, and affective states. The underlying psychological trauma here is often subtle. Repeated disappointment, chronic stress that depletes dopamine reserves, or a prolonged state of emotional vigilance where the nervous system decided it was safer to feel nothing than to risk feeling overwhelming pain or joy. The common misconception is that the anhedonic person lacks empathy or is simply cold, but what they are often experiencing is a defensive mechanism gone awry. By shutting down the capacity for overwhelming joy, the brain inadvertently shuts down the capacity for all feeling. It is a form of learned helplessness at the neurological level, a protective maneuver that resulted in an internal prison of flatness. Understanding this dual nature allows us to move away from self-blame and toward a quiet, compassionate diagnosis of our own internal wiring. The deep psychological revelation we must confront here is the paradox of post-trauma action. Most people suffering from anhedonia operate under a fundamental misconception. That feeling must precede action. They are waiting for the wave of motivation, for the spark of joy, for the return of desire before they engage with life again. They are standing at the edge of the pool, demanding to feel warm before they step into the water. But this waiting game is what keeps the anhedonic loop running. According to research on reinforcement learning and psychological models like behavioral activation, the relationship between action and feeling is the inverse of what we intuitively believe. The insight is this: motivation is the byproduct of action, not the prerequisite. The system is broken because it is starved of reinforcement. The reward circuit cannot repair itself through introspection alone. It needs tangible, physical evidence that the world is still worth engaging with. Our nervous system learns through repetition and feedback loops. When you act, even without feeling, you generate a tiny piece of data. If the action is completed successfully, even if it is just washing the dishes or completing one small task at work, you register a sliver of mastery and competence. This mastery is the critical ingredient. The initial reward you get is not hedonistic pleasure, it is reward learning. The brain records: task initiated, task completed, predicted outcome achieved. This non-emotional reinforcement, repeated over time, slowly, painstakingly begins to communicate to the dopamine system that the effort to reward ratio is viable again. This is why traditional motivational speeches fail. Telling an anhedonic person to be positive is like telling a car with a dead battery to simply start itself. It addresses the symptoms, lack of movement, but ignores the infrastructure problem, lack of current. You must become your own quiet neuroengineer. You must engage in activities that are structurally rewarding, activities that offer competence, structure, and routine before you feel the slightest urge to do them. This process is slow, often frustrating, and completely devoid of immediate emotional payoff. But it is the only way to reestablish the chemical and neurological signal that life is worth investing in. The goal is not instant happiness. The goal is simply to make the reward center functional again. We must widen the lens and acknowledge that anhedonia is far more than just a feature of major depressive disorder. As a transdiagnostic symptom, it is a common language of a weary nervous system, appearing across a spectrum of psychiatric and psychological conditions, and this recognition is paramount for designing appropriate responses. Consider its presence in schizophrenia, where it forms a critical component of the negative symptom cluster. Here, the anhedonia may be linked to a core biological affliction of the reward system itself, making the experience chronic and trait-based. A persistent vulnerability factor. In post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, anhedonia manifests clearly as emotional numbing and detachment. The system, having been overloaded by intense threat, retreats into a state of hyperprotection. It is a calculated, if ultimately self-sabotaging, safety feature. The brain prefers the sterile safety of nothingness to the volatile risk of feeling too much, be it pain or joy. Joy, in a trauma-informed context, can feel dangerous because intense feeling often precedes another overwhelming event. Even in conditions like ADHD or chronic burnout, the mechanism is often dopamine dysregulation. The person isn't inherently unmotivated. Their dopamine receptors are simply exhausted or improperly regulated by constant, high-stakes stimulation. The reward system is so saturated by high-intensity short-term rewards, like scrolling social media or crisis management, that it no longer registers the subtle, long-term rewards required for sustained life satisfaction. This perspective is crucial because it tells us that the underlying cause is not a moral failing, but a systemic imbalance. Whether the imbalance is caused by trauma, genetics, or chronic environmental stress, the treatment principle remains. The system must be reset. You cannot treat anhedonia by simply addressing the surface condition, whether it be anxiety or depression. You must directly target the compromised reward circuit itself. Recognizing anhedonia's transdiagnostic nature gives us a path forward that focuses on function over label. It allows us to step back from the emotional chaos of the diagnosis and look at the quiet, verifiable mechanisms of the brain. The task is not to change your personality. It is to recalibrate your internal sensitivity to the promise of future reward and the reality of present enjoyment. Given the quiet complexity of anhedonia, the path toward recovery must be equally subtle and structurally sound. We are not aiming for sudden explosive joy, which often proves unsustainable. We are aiming for recalibration, a slow, patient act of neuro-reengineering. The gold standard non-pharmacological approach, as identified in clinical models, is behavioral activation, BA. This is not about forcing yourself to feel happy. It is about forcing yourself to accumulate data. Principle 1, reestablishing the signal, not chasing the feeling. The core mandate of BA is to engage in activities before you feel like it. You select activities based on value, what truly aligns with your core self, not what society expects. And mastery, activities that provide a clear sense of competence. For the anhedonic system, the reward is initially not pleasure, but the verifiable knowledge that you can still complete a task. You must become skilled at what we call small reinforcement. If you manage to send those emails, you don't seek a celebratory feeling. You simply log the success internally. The accumulation of these small structural victories slowly begins to rebuild the neural pathways linking effort to outcome. You are essentially providing your reward center, the deserted gas station, with undeniable proof that if the pump handle is lifted, a tiny amount of fuel will flow. This small flow is enough to initiate the larger process of self-repair. Principle 2. Respecting the rate of neuroplasticity. Recovery from anhedonia is a biological reality rooted in neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to rewire itself. This process is inherently slow, demanding profound patience and self-compassion. The neural connections you are trying to rebuild, the pathways involving dopamine and the PFC, cannot be fixed in a moment of insight. They require the physical, biological effort of repetition. Therefore, the guidance is gentle. Do not aim for the activities that used to bring you intense pleasure, as the gap between expectation and reality will be too wide and too painful. Instead, aim for activities that are instinctual, like basic movement, food preparation, or simple hygiene, or structurally necessary, like completing one small, overdue task. By reducing the emotional stakes, you reduce the risk of further system shutdown and allow the small positive reinforcement to accumulate unnoticed, like sand forming a foundation under the waves. Guidance for immediate action, the quiet start. Audit your day. Identify one task you complete daily that you have absolute mastery over, e.g., making your bed, taking a 5-minute walk. Focus solely on logging the completion of this task as a success, regardless of feeling. The 5-minute rule. When facing a high-value task that feels too heavy, e.g., connecting with a friend, starting an exercise routine, commit only to 5 minutes. The goal is to initiate the action, thereby forcing the brain to generate that initial, non-emotional data point. Reintroduce novelty. The dopamine system thrives on novel. Introduce minor, low-stakes changes to your routine, a different route for your walk, trying a new herb in a simple meal. This gently stimulates the reward circuit's inherent interest in exploration without demanding intense emotional output. This process is not about finding the magic cure. It is about understanding that your brain is capable of rebuilding, but it requires the right kind of input, quiet, structured, repetitive action that proves the world is safe and predictable enough to feel again. We began this journey by looking at the terrifying emptiness of anhedonia, the fear that the machine of joy is broken permanently. But the evidence from neuroscience and clinical psychology offers a profoundly quiet hope. Anhedonia does not have to be a fixed state. The key message is one of responsibility, not blame. Your brain is not permanently flawed. It is perhaps temporarily exhausted, starved of the right kind of input, or locked into a protective shutdown mode. The pain of the flatness you feel is simply the signal that the intricate system linking your actions to your internal value system is misfiring. The journey back is not a dramatic leap toward euphoria, but a patient descent into the simple, foundational mechanics of being human. It means accepting the uncomfortable truth that you must work without wages for a time, You must force yourself to show up at that deserted gas station every day and simply try the pump handle, not for the fuel, but for the act of trying itself. The real insight here is about trust. When anhedonia takes hold, you lose trust in your internal world's ability to reward you. You lose trust that effort will lead to anything worthwhile. The task of recovery, therefore, is to slowly, quietly, reestablish trust in the system through verifiable objective success, the small wins of mastery. Do not chase the big, elusive feeling of happy. Chase the tiny, consistent feeling of competence. Let competence be the scaffolding upon which future pleasure may eventually climb. The goal is simply to make the world safe enough, predictable enough, and low stakes enough for your nervous system to disarm its self-imposed shutdown. You are giving your brain permission to realize that the world is still safe enough to feel. The colors won't rush back in a flash of light. But if you commit to the quiet labor of behavioral activation, one small, valuable, and consistent action at a time, those colors, very slowly, very subtly, will begin to paint themselves back onto the edges of your perception. Until then, hold the quiet intensity of your inner world with compassion. The work is internal, non-emotional, and deeply real. The journey starts not when you feel ready, but when you choose to simply begin.